This is the last of the 3 learning modules about time, and I'm also going to throw in a little bit of extra stuff, compass points, at the end, and you'll see why when we get there. They are all connected. I want to start by describing a system called the Rokuyo system. Roku as in 6, yo like yobi, getsuyobi no yobi. The Rokuryo system is a traditional system for assigning one of 6 names to each day of the lunar calendar. In the same way that you can assign cycles to a day in the lunar calendar, you can assign, or there are assigned, Rokuryo names to those days. Each of the 6 days, 6 names, it's better than 60, isn't it, is associated with particular beliefs about good or bad fortune. And some events, particularly weddings and funerals, may be scheduled to fall on particular days. Here's an example of a calendar from Japan that gives you just a basic solar calendar. We have January here, but you'll notice that each one of the days has a kanji combination on it. So here we have, it's the first day of January, and then there's 2 kanji beneath it. And 2 here, some of them are black, some of them are red. And then you can see that they repeat themselves. So the same one that we see on the 1st, we see then down on the 7th. And then we see, oh, I'm sorry, yes, we see on the 7th, and then we see it again here on the 11th. There are only a total of 6 of these. So what I'd like to do is go over each one, what those mean, and then how they appear in everyday life in Japan. Let me show you one more thing, speaking of everyday life. This is a picture of a clock and calendar and also a thermometer produced by the Casio company. It's electronic, I'm sure you can tell that. And so it's got what you'd expect. It tells us that this particular day is the 5th Wednesday. It's the 30th. It's Heisei 22, which hasn't even happened yet, but just as an example, right? And June. It gives us the time, the temperature, the humidity. But there's one thing that's kind of unusual. Those 2 kanji. Those are the same 2 kanji that we saw previously on this calendar, at least some of them. So there it is right there. Tai-an. What's up with that? What are those doing on that calendar and here? Let's go over each one. We'll start with this one. And each one of these combinations has, most of them have variable readings, and I'll give you your choices. This one can be pronounced sensho or senkachi or sakigachi. If the day is labeled with these kanji, that day is believed to be auspicious for undertaking new business, filing lawsuits, and dealing with the government. The morning of days like this are said to be lucky, and the afternoons unlucky. The next one can be pronounced tomobiki or yuin. This day is said to be auspicious at all times except around noon. However, because the characters, the kanji, tomobiki seem to mean tomo o hiku, as in to pull your friend, funerals and related events are usually not held on this day because they would seem to draw the living into the world of the dead. This combination can be pronounced senpu or senbu or senmake or sakimake, take your pick. This is supposed to be the opposite of sengachi or sensho, and thus a bad day for undertaking new business, filing lawsuits, or dealing with the government. The morning is unlucky and the afternoon is lucky. This is butsumetsu. Only really one pronunciation, butsumetsu. According to some references, this word was originally written with different kanji, with this kanji instead, but the first character, butsu, was replaced with the homophone, butsu, which means Buddha. Of course, that first one means simply thing. That one there means thing. But they're both read butsu. As a result, it's sometimes understood to mean, this combination is understood to mean Buddha's death day, because The metsu means to extinguish, though most serious Buddhists don't really seem to accept that interpretation. The day is regarded by many as entirely unlucky. Most Japanese avoid holding weddings on Butsumetsu, and some also avoid moving their place of residence, opening stores, or undertaking any kind of major activities. A very unlucky day. This is Tai-an or Dai-an. This is thought to be a particularly lucky day, an auspicious day, and it's often chosen for weddings. In fact, it can be difficult to schedule a wedding on a June Sunday that happens to be a Tai-an because it's like perfect storm, June Sunday, that's the Western tradition, and then Tai-an, that's the Japanese tradition. If you want to get married on a Tai-an Sunday in June, you better be ready to pay an awful lot. Likewise, lottery booths, and yes, there is a lotto in Japan. Lottery booths often display signs on Tai-an days to suggest to passersby that it would be a really good day to buy a lotto ticket because, hey, you never know. This one can be pronounced shaku or jaku or jakko or shakko or sekiguchi. I like sekiguchi, it's easier for me to remember. This day is unlucky for all activities, with only the period around noon being auspicious. Some builders, construction builders, are said to avoid holding groundbreaking ceremonies or starting new construction on this particular day. So really, what's the effect here? Well, Rokyo days are taken seriously by most Japanese only when it comes to scheduling certain major events like weddings, funerals, moving, things like that. Some wedding halls offer discounts for weddings held on Butsumetsu because there's so little demand on those days, and others refuse to hold weddings at all then. It's just unlucky. Likewise, funerals and memorial services are also usually not held on a Tomobiki, as I mentioned, and moving companies are less busy on Butsumetsu because most people don't want to move on a Butsumetsu. You might be able to get a discount then too. I'll show you an example. Here's an advertisement I found on the web. I thought this was great. This is a wedding hall, and this is their discount page, and they have a number of different discounts, and one of them you can see here that I'm highlighting is the Butsumetsu discount. Their other discounts are the last minute discount, the weekday discount, the big group discount, the nighttime discount, the shotgun wedding discount, that's how I'm going to translate it, and the quick discount. So a Butsumetsu would be a day that you might be able to get that wedding hall a little bit cheaper. While anecdotal evidence suggests that some Japanese take all of the Rokyo really seriously and pay attention to them when going about their day-to-day activities, these attitudes are really far from universal. The variety of attitudes toward Rokyo can be seen in the calendars and the date books that we see printed in Japan. While some indicate the Rokyo for each day, many indicate none at all. Some show only the really strong ones like Butsumetsu and Tai-an. And some newspapers indicate each day's Rokyo status near the weather report or with the sunrise and sunset times for that day, while others don't mention it at all. So it really varies. Anecdotally, I'll say that we kind of have a parallel in the United States. So even if you are not particularly superstitious, you might think twice about scheduling your wedding on Friday the 13th. Or maybe you really don't care about those things at all, but it still affects you. So for example, I have a cousin who got married on Halloween. He got a super discount because nobody else wanted to get married on Halloween, and so it was easy for him and his wife to throw this huge party and not spend a whole lot of money. What's the history of the Rokyo? As it's currently implemented in Japan, it's just one version of kind of a bigger system, an old practice called the Rekichu. And that practice assigns meanings to individual days. Besides good and bad days, auspicious and inauspicious days, Rekichu systems have also marked holidays and ceremony days, planning and harvest days, etc., etc. And you might not be surprised to guess that the system is remotely based on the sexagenary cycle. So in the sexagenary cycle, we've got 60 cycles, and in the Rokyo system, we have 6 different possible kinds of days. I'm not going to try and trace how the sexagenary cycle is connected with the Rokyo, but I thought I would mention that. The original Dokyo are said to have come from China around the 14th century, although the names and the days and the meanings assigned to them have undergone many variations over the years. They gained widespread popularity in the Tokugawa period, but when the Western calendar was adopted by the Japanese government in 1870-3, it was right at the edge, then that system, the Rekichu, was banned. In other words, you weren't allowed to print those on calendars anymore. And though the Rekichu continued to appear on unofficial calendars, it wasn't until the lifting of press restrictions following World War II that the Dokuyo began appearing widely on published calendars again. So it kind of dipped out of the spotlight and then came back in again. Here's an example of a calendar, another calendar, that gives us the Dokuyo. They're a little bit small, but they're up there in the left-hand corner of each day. It also gives us the phases of the moon. And this is actually the lunar calendar. And it also gives us the corresponding date in the Western calendar. So what about the assignment of Dokuyo to particular days? The days of the Dokuyo basically follow a cycle, as we see here, but it's not quite that easy. The cycle is interrupted periodically because the first days of particular months in the old lunar calendar are always assigned the same specific Dokuyo day as follows. So the first month and the 7th month in the lunar calendar are always assigned the same, that day, regardless of where you are in a cycle, always assigned that same Dokuyo. Likewise, the second and the 8th, the first day of the 2nd and the 8th month in the lunar calendar are always assigned the same Dokuyo. And then once you pick up that Dokuyo, for example here Tomobiki, then you follow that prescribed cycle that we were just looking at. There is a way to calculate the Dokuyo. I'm not going to test you on this, but I decided to throw it in there for a little bit of trivia. Using the lunar calendar, you can calculate the Dokuyo based on the remainder, so to speak, of a simple formula. And right now I'm going to apologize to anybody who's math sensitive, because if you are a mathematician or you love math, this will probably make you angry, because when you say remainder, it's kind of wacky. Okay, so for example, each one of these, here they are, the 6 Dokuyo, they're assigned a specific number. So we start with Taian, it gets a 0, Butsumetsu gets a 5. So we take the lunar month, add the lunar day, divide it by 6, and the remainder equals whatever the Dokuyo is based on that chart. So for example, New Year's Day, 1 plus 1 equals 2. 2 divided by 6, you're only working with whole numbers here, with integers, so you end up with 0. There's no remainder, or there's this, it's not even remainder. That's why I said it's mathematically really frustrating. So you have a remainder of 2, you can't have fractions, and so 2 equals this Dokuyo, a Sengachi. How about Hina Matsuri? 3 plus 3 equals 6. 6 divided by 6 is 1. Remainder of 0. Oh, that's the Taian. Boys' Day, 5 plus 5 is 10. 10 divided by 6. Again, you can't work with fractions, so you get a 1. Remainder of 4. And we end up with this particular Dokuyo. And so if you were really zealous, you could use this process and figure out the Dokuyo for just about any day. I don't know anybody who does that, but I thought I'd throw it in just for the fun of it. Let's switch gears a little bit and talk about days of the week, just briefly. The East Asian naming system of weekdays closely parallels that of the Latin system and is ordered after the 7 luminaries, the so-called 7 luminaries, which consist of the sun, the moon, and the 5 planets that are visible to the naked eye. So we got a mixture here. We got a star, we have a satellite, and then we've got planets. We're just going to call them luminaries. The 5 planets are named after the 5 elements in traditional East Asian philosophy. These are the same elements that we were looking at when we were looking at the earthly branches. So we've got fire, water, wood, metal, and earth. And those are associated with Mars, Mercury, Jupiter, Venus, and Saturn. So here's a brief chart, and you should be familiar with these words even if you're just in first year Japanese. So the Japanese word for Sunday is Nichiyobi because the luminary that that day is associated with is the sun. So we see here all of the luminaries, and then we also see the elements that they're associated with, or the bodies that they're associated with, and the Japanese term for those luminaries. I have here in planet in quotation marks, but it really should be just luminaries. So these are the basic luminaries, and then we have the days of the week. So you ever wondered where those words came from? There actually was a method to the madness. Just as a side, I'll say that the Koreans still use the same sort of system, but the Chinese don't. The Chinese just use numbers, first of the week, second of the week, that kind of thing. All right, so let's move on to telling time. There are 3 systems for telling time in pre-modern Japan, and we're going to take a look at all 3. The most prominent one first. In the first one, the hours of the day are associated with the earthly stems. And if you've done any reading in classical Japanese literature, you may have run into this, particularly Heian period works. Something like Seishonagon's Pillow Book or The Tale of Genji will refer to the hour of the horse, or the hour of the monkey, or the hour of the ox, or something like that. Those are all earthly stems, and I'm going to show you what those particular hours are. That system originates in China because it's got that earthly stem thing going on, but it spread across East Asia. Now, in that system, each of the earthly stems represents not 1 but 2 hours in a 24-hour day. And that's on this chart. So we're going to be looking a lot at this chart for the rest of this learning module. I also have a link to it in the Blackboard Learning Module page in case you want to review it. Okay, so this chart does a lot of things. To try and keep you focused, what I've done here is shade the part that I'm talking about. So the shaded part that's blue here is that first system that we're going to take a look at. Just those particular circles, that inner blue circle and then that outer blue circle. So what are we looking at here? At the top, you'll see that this is the hour, so-called hour of the rat. Here's that kanji for rat in the earthly branches. And that corresponds to 11 p.m. Here's our 11. This is our Western numbers, okay? To straddling across midnight to 1 a.m. And you'll recall that this character in the earthly branches is the first one in the series. They're always, the earthly branches are always presented in this order, right? And this is the first one. So the first hour, so to speak, which is actually 2 hours, runs from 11 p.m. to 1 a.m. Now, some translators will translate it that way. They'll say in parentheses, oh, it's 11 to 1, sometime in that period. Other translators will just sort of strike a happy balance in the middle and say, oh, it was around midnight. That's really just artistic license, however that translator wants to do it. So now that we know what the hour of the rat is, you can probably make some guesses about what the other hours are. I won't go through them all, but just briefly, this is the hour of the ox, which extends from 1 o'clock to 3 o'clock. And this is the hour of the tiger, which actually extends from 3 to 5. You might call it 4, but most people will say, oh, it's 3 o'clock through 5 o'clock in the morning. And you can continue going around the circle for each one of the earthly stems and finding the corresponding hours. I think that's relatively straightforward. But now I want to point out something. I love this lecture because there's a whole bunch of aha moments going on here. Look at that middle thing. You know those words gozen and gogo that you learned really early on in your Japanese class? And you probably learned the kanji for them too. And as we were looking at the earthly stems, I don't know how many people really looked at that earthly branch and thought, oh, I know that. Most of them look at these kanji and think, well, okay, that's ko, but yeah, I don't really know these. They don't look all that familiar. They kind of miss this one. You know that kanji, and the context in which you know it is in the word for morning and the word for afternoon. So what's going on here? Well, the hour of the horse is here. This is the hour of the horse. It's between 11 a.m. and 1 p.m. or if you want to strike it, noon. So when you say gozen, you're saying before the hour of the horse. And when you say gogo, you're saying after the hour of the horse. I bet you didn't know that you knew so much, but you do. In the second system of telling time, the day is divided into 12 parts. But instead of the branches, the earthly branches, they're assigned numbers. So the hour of the rat, for example, corresponds to the 9th hour. This is a wacky system because it starts at the 9th hour and then it goes down, as you'll see, and it doesn't get back down to 1. It gets halfway and then it starts over again. I'll illustrate this in just a moment. So after the 9th hour, the next hour is the 8th hour, and so on backwards until the last period of the morning, which is the 4th hour. Go figure. The hours were distinguished by a preface indicating the time of day. So much in the same way that we say 3 o'clock in the morning, or 3 a.m., or 3 o'clock in the afternoon, or 3 p.m., then there's a phrase for that in this system also in Japanese. So let me show you this on the chart. Once again, we're just looking at the shaded circle portion here. So that part that I have circled in red would be pronounced akatsuki kokonotsu. So the kokonotsu is the 9 part, as you can see from the kanji down here. Akatsuki indicates it's daybreak. So this would be the beginning. This would be daybreak. Now, okay, I know day doesn't break at midnight. Don't argue with me about it, but that's just how the translation works. Okay. How about the next hour? The next hour is called akatsuki yatsu, 8th of daybreak. And so that corresponds also, as you see, with the earthly branches as we go around the circle. So this is also the hour of the ox, but you could call it akatsuki yatsu. The next one, the hour of the tiger, is akatsuki nanatsu, the 7th of daybreak. And then we leave akatsuki behind and we move to ake. And ake here is translated as dawn. So this is the 6th of dawn. This one is the 5th of morning, asa itsutsu. Asa yotsu, 4th of the morning. Hiru kokonotsu. Isn't that weird? Let me go back just one. So here we are at the 4th. Asa yotsu, 4th of the morning. You'd think 3 would come next, wouldn't you? But that's not how it works. We start that whole thing over again, and now we're going to go from 9. And we're at hiru kokonotsu, the 9th of day. This is 12 noon. Hiru yatsu, the 8th of day. And now I want to break for one more aha moment. If you've lived in Japan, you probably know this word, or if you're of Japanese heritage, you know this word. And if you're in first or second year Japanese, maybe you've heard it. The word for after-school snack is oyatsu, like here. Oyatsu! See this mother, she's making this nice little snack for her kids. How about this one? Disney. Oyatsu, tanoshii oyatsu. You know, that yatsu, where does that come from? For the longest time, I used that word and I just never thought about it. Oops, let me go back 2 more. But there it is. This is where that word oyatsu comes from. Oyatsu is that snack you have in the afternoon during that particular hour, sometime around 2 o'clock. And that's where the word comes from. Nowadays, oyatsu is always written in hiragana. And I think people have forgotten about the etymology of that word. I have seen in Meiji period texts this word written with the ya as kanji, with hachi, oyatsu. And indeed, when I saw that, suddenly I said to myself, oh, of course, that's where that word comes from, because I was familiar with this older form of keeping time. So moving forward around the circle, we end up at Yu Nanatsu, 7th of the afternoon. Kuremutsu, 6th of dusk. Yoru Itsutsu, 5th of night. and Yoruyotsu, fourth of night. And that's the second system that we're looking at. But there's one more on this chart. That's called the 5-night system, the Goya system. And this is one other way of referring to only nighttime, only hours during the night. So this doesn't cover the full 24-hour clock. This system broke the night into 5 even sections, and each one was referred to using one of the heavenly stems, not the earthly branches. Let me show you. So it's just this tiny blue portion of the chart that we're going to be looking at here. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I suppose you could say, okay, that connects with the earthly branches, but traditionally that's not considered what's happening. And you'll look here where I'm highlighting. These are where the heavenly stems come in. You see them? In order, of course. So let me show you an example of this system. This is from Satomi Hakkenden, which is a Tokugawa period text. It was written by a man named Takizawa Bakin. It's a huge epic, a Confucian epic, many volumes. And in Satomi Hakkenden, Takizawa Bakin writes, "The skies were clear and it was dark in the first hour of the evening, between 7 and 9 p.m. Or in Japanese, sora wa harete mo yoiyami ni." So the yoiyami is right here. Yoiyami ni. I'm going to go back and look at that chart for just a second so you can put it all together. There's the yoiyami ni. Okay. There are also poetic names for the lunar months, which are good to recognize. You don't have to memorize them, but it's good to recognize them because you might very likely see them in a text if you're reading a more advanced text. And if you're a native speaker, you probably have these memorized from an early age. You shouldn't really have to think hard about it. Although the months were often referred to by number, as I've said, the first of the first month, the second month, the third month, they had these specific poetic names. And there's more than one set of poetic names. I'm just going to give you the most common ones. The first month is usually called Mutsuki. The second month, Kisaragi. The third month, Yayoi. The fourth month, Uzuki. The fifth month, Satsuki. The sixth month, Minazuki. The seventh, Fumizuki. The eighth, Hazuki. The ninth, Nagatsuki. The 10th, Kaminazuki. The 11th, Shimotsuki. And the 12th, Shiwasu or Chihasu. Now, if you look at the English translation of these poetic names, you might get some idea about where they came from. So the first month of friends and family, because at the beginning of the year you're celebrating and you're getting together. Kisaragi, month of layered clothes, because it's darn cold still. Yayoi, month when growth starts. It's springtime. Tsutsuya is a kind of a flower, so it's when that flower blooms. Satsuki, the rice planting month. Minazuki, no water month. Now, if you're familiar with Japan, you might think, what? It rains like crazy in June. Yeah, but the 6th month is not the same as June. Remember, this is the lunar calendar. So we're thinking after rainy season. The 7th month, Fumizuki, a month of letters when one writes letters. The 8th month, we're now into autumn, the month of leaves. Nagatsuki, as you're going into winter, the long month. Kaminazuki, that one's, I love that one. I think it's a great name. A lot of students say, what, no God's month, what does that mean? Well, I'm told that that's the month traditionally when in Shinto shrines, the gods would leave their shrine and go off into the countryside. So they were not in residence, let's put it that way. The 11th month, the month of frost. And the last one, the month of running about. Why running about? Because traditionally, at the end of the year, it was expected that everybody would settle all debts and take care of all errands and obligations before the new year began. And so that last month, the 12th month, is a month when you're the most busy. I have a calendar sitting on my wall. I get a new one sent to me every year by the Japan Tourist Bureau, and it has different floral arrangements on the photograph part of it, but it labels each month with the English name, July, August, September, and with the poetic month name. So even something like that that's printed now in the 21st century harkens back to these poetic month names. All right, I promised we'd get to the solar calendar, and here we are. Now, the lunar calendar I mentioned earlier, it's sometimes called the civic calendar or the civil calendar. That's what Webb calls it, because that was important. That calendar, the lunar calendar, was important for the bureaucrats, the people in the imperial family, and people who were running the country. But if you were a farmer, that lunar calendar, even with intercalary months, was not as reliable as you would have liked. You really want to know much more accurately when to plant your crops, when to harvest your crops, based on past year experience with weather. So the Japanese farmers used a solar calendar, which they also adopted from the Chinese. That calendar was much more accurate for their purposes, such as planting crops. That was the biggie. The natural year was measured by reference to the period between two successive occurrences of the winter solstice. So in the winter solstice is the shortest day of the year. It happens in December 21st. And so the solar year is the time it takes for the Earth to make that complete cycle around the sun. So in that solar calendar, the winter solstice is the midpoint of the first of 12 divisions, and those 12 divisions are called setsu. Sometimes those are translated as seasons. Each setsu was of equal duration, about 30.44 days. And the beginning of a setsu was known as a sekki. The midpoint of a setsu was known as a chuki. And combining sekki and chuki, we get a total of 24 seasons. That's quite a lot. I mean, normally we think of seasons, oh, there's 4. There's winter and spring and summer and fall. But if you were a farmer, you'd like to have a lot more accuracy than that. And so in the solar calendar, it's broken up into 24 separate setsu or seasons. Each one of these seasons was given a name that indicated the time of the year for farmers, as follows. So I've got a half and half. I couldn't fit the whole chart on one slide. So we start at the top with Rishun, the beginning of spring, and a particular association that it would have. Sometimes it's calendrical, often it's natural, and an approximation of what that date is tied to in the Gregorian or the solar or the Western calendar. The next season was called Usui or rainwater, and that was when snow turned to rain. Keijitsu, the end of insect hibernation when the bugs start coming out, warmer weather. And then we have the vernal equinox. I won't go through each of these individually. I think you can look at them yourself if you really want the time to read. Just pause the video, that's fine. But I'll point out that I have made bold some of these particular holidays, and they're the ones that we still hear about in modern day Japan. And in some cases, they're still celebrated in modern day Japan. So we have Shunbun here, the vernal equinox. I'm going to go forward to the next slide, which is the second half of this. And we also have Shubun, the autumnal equinox. You still hear people referring to these even in modern day Japan. One of the holidays that is associated with this calendar is known as Setsubun. We didn't see the word Setsubun on those previous charts, but I'll explain why. Setsubun, which is often referred to as the bean throwing festival or bean throwing ceremony, is the day before the beginning of spring in Japan. The name Setsubun means seasonal division, but usually the term refers to the spring Setsubun, properly called Rishun, and Rishun is that word that we saw on the previous slide. And what happens in Setsubun, if you've lived in Japan, you've seen that happen. People will go gather together to celebrate the end of the year, and some poor person will end up dressed as an oni. Here you see two poor people dressed up as oni, and the children who are sitting behind them are chanting "Oni wa soto, fuku wa uchi," out with the demons, out with the oni, and in with the luck. And then they throw dried beans. You can see the dried beans on the ground here. They throw dried beans at these poor people who are dressed up as demons. So the idea is that you're chasing out the demons and you're bringing in luck for the new year. It's kind of a fun, raucous thing. You just got to watch out for those flying beans. They can be painful. Last but not least in today's lesson is compass points, and this doesn't have to do necessarily with time, but it does have to do with the earthly branches, and so I felt like this was the best place to put it in there. So we're going to address the last part of that big circular chart that we've been looking at all day today in this section. Each earthly stem represents 30 degrees of the compass, of the 360-degree compass, as follows. So here we have our earthly stems in the same order we've always seen them. And we can see that the directions north, east, south, and west correspond specifically with some of these stems. Now, if we chart this out, it will look like this. So now what we're focusing on is that outer circle, the outer blue circle. Think of this as a compass. And you'll notice here we have north, east, south, and west of the compass. Our earthly branches are the same as we saw before here. So north is the direction of the rat. And if you're reading, again, Heian period literature, you may see reference to something like that. A direction of the rat, a direction of the rabbit, that's east. South is the direction of the horse, and west is the direction of the cock. But what about those things in between? Well, the directions of northeast, southeast, southwest, and northwest are indicated by kanji that take on the reading of the two stems on either side. This is really kind of wacky, so I wanted to point it out. Actually, before I get there, let me go back here and point out that in English, when we talk about compass points, we have the main ones, northeast, south, and west. And then we think, well, then there's northeast, southeast, southwest, and northwest. And Japanese has words for those directions, as we see here. But then there's a new traditional word for those. However, the thing I want to point out is those directions, northeast, southeast, southwest, and northwest, do not correspond specifically to an animal. See how they all come down in between an animal, in between an earthly branch? So it's not as if northeast, for example, corresponds specifically to an earthly branch. It just doesn't. But I'm going to show you what does happen. Okay, however, sorry, one more thing. Some of my students who are of East Asian heritage have difficulty with this, so I wanted to point it out. In English, when we speak about this direction, this compass point, we call that north-northeast. N-N-E. And I'm mentioning this because it's going to show up on the homework, so I want you to understand how this is referred to in English. This compass point is called east-northeast. E-N-E, etc. If you have questions about that, feel free to email me. Okay, let's get back to northeast, southeast, southwest, and northwest. On this chart, we have out in the outer reaches, in the pink boxes, those characters, those kanji that have been assigned, as I said on the previous slide, the the readings of the two characters, the two earthly stems that show up on either side. And I know it's really kind of hard to see, so let me blow it up and rotate them for you so you can really get a feel. So up here in the upper left we have this character, and you know, this is used in other contexts in Japanese. You can look it up in your Nelsons, you'll find it. It's not too unusual. But in this context it's read inu-i because it's between the inu and the e, the dog and the boar. This one is read ushi tora. That character is read ushi tora because it's between the ushi and the tora, between the ox and the tiger. The next one is tatsumi because it's between the tatsu, the dragon, and the mi, the snake. And the last one is hitsuji saru because it is between the hitsuji and the saru, the sheep, and the monkey. Not all of these will be listed under those readings in Nelson's. This one for sure is Ushitora. It kind of depends on your dictionary what they're going to give you. But it's a kind of fun trivia to find out, gee, how do those characters get that kind of weird kunyomi? Well, and in what context would you use that kunyomi? And now you can see it pretty clearly. So just can't, in case you can't see that connection there, I've drawn the arrows for you. All right, that wraps up our lessons on telling time. Went all the way from periodization down to the hours of the day.